Humble bride was rejected for being disabled until the most feared millionaire CEO took her in front of everyone, completely changing the course of her life. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The morning sun filtered through the dusty curtains, casting long shadows across Emma Wilson's small apartment. She sat at her worn kitchen table, staring at the wedding invitation clutched in her trembling hands. 6 years had passed since the accident that left her with a pronounced limp and a right arm that refused to extend fully. 6 years of pitying glances, whispered comments, and the slow erosion of her dreams. "You can do this," Emma whispered to herself, smoothing down her simple blue dress. Her sister Lily was getting married today, and despite her anxiety about facing the entire family, Emma wouldn't miss it for the world. She glanced at the clock. 10:30 a.m. The ceremony was at 2 p.m., giving her just enough time to gather her courage and make her way to the venue. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget to bring the photo album like you promised, and please try to look presentable." Emma sighed, reading between the lines of her mother's message. It wasn't enough that she was attending. She needed to somehow magically erase the limp that had become part of her identity. The accident had changed everything. Once a promising dancer with scholarships to prestigious academies, Emma had been on her way to a performance when a drunk driver had sent her car spinning off the highway. She had survived, but her career hadn't. The months of surgeries and physical therapy had drained not only her savings but also her spirit. When her fiancé Marcus had walked out a year later, claiming he couldn't handle being a caretaker, the last piece of her old life had crumbled. Emma grabbed her cane, a sleek, modern design that she'd splurged on for the wedding, and made her way to the bathroom. She studied her reflection critically. At 28, she was still beautiful in a quiet way, with long chestnut hair that fell in natural waves and expressive hazel eyes that revealed more than she sometimes wished they would. The dress she'd chosen hid the worst of her scars, but nothing could conceal her limp or the way her right arm hung slightly awkwardly at her side. "It's just one day," she reminded herself. "For Lily." As Emma carefully applied her makeup, her mind wandered to the venue, Blackwood Estate, owned by the notorious Alexander Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. The ruthless businessman had a reputation that preceded him, known for destroying competitors without mercy and ruling his corporate empire with an iron fist. Why Lily's fiancé James had connections to such a man was beyond Emma's understanding, but she'd heard that Blackwood rarely attended these events personally, instead merely lending his estate for select occasions. The taxi pulled up in front of her apartment building at precisely noon. Emma had intentionally arranged for transportation rather than asking any family member to pick her up. She knew they'd find a reason to be too busy anyway. She'd long ago stopped expecting much from her family, who viewed her disability as an inconvenience at best and an embarrassment at worst. "Blackwood Estate, please," she told the driver, settling into the back seat and carefully arranging her dress to avoid wrinkling it. "Nice place," the driver commented, pulling away from the curb. "Wedding?" "My sister's," Emma replied, offering no further details. The less she talked about it, the less real it felt. The drive to the estate took nearly 40 minutes, winding through the outskirts of the city and into the lush countryside beyond. With each passing mile, the knot in Emma's stomach tightened. She hadn't seen most of her extended family since her cousin's wedding 2 years ago, a disaster where her uncle had drunkenly suggested she find someone like her, another cripple. Her mother had laughed it off while Emma had escaped to the bathroom to cry. As they approached the estate's massive wrought iron gates, Emma gasped despite herself. Blackwood Estate was even more impressive than she'd imagined. Acres of manicured gardens surrounding a mansion that looked like it belonged in a period drama. Stone fountains dotted the circular driveway, and staff in uniform stood ready to assist arriving guests. The taxi stopped at the base of grand marble steps leading to the entrance. Emma paid the driver, adding a generous tip. "Need help with the steps, miss?" he asked, noticing her cane. "I'll manage, thank you," Emma replied with a practiced smile. She'd learned long ago that accepting help often came with unwanted pity. As she carefully navigated the steps, Emma's phone buzzed again. Another text from her mother. "Where are you? Family photos in 20 minutes. No, how are you? Or, do you need help?" Just demands and expectations as usual. Emma typed back a quick "just arrived" before tucking her phone away. She paused at the top of the stairs, taking a moment to gather herself before entering the grand foyer where staff directed guests to the garden for the ceremony. "Emma, finally!" Her mother, Catherine Wilson, rushed toward her, elegant in a lavender dress that probably cost more than 3 months of Emma's rent. "We've been waiting. Where's the album?" "Hello to you too, Mom," Emma said, patting the small bag hanging from her shoulder. "I have it right here." Catherine's eyes darted to Emma's cane, then quickly away. "Well, come along then. Your sister wants these photos before guests start arriving in force." She turned without waiting to see if Emma could keep up, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Emma followed more slowly, gritting her teeth against the familiar frustration. The garden was transformed for the wedding, white chairs arranged in neat rows, a flower-adorned arch at the front, and white rose petals scattered along the aisle. Family members were gathered near a flowering cherry tree, the photographer arranging them in various groupings. "There she is!" Lily, resplendent in her white gown, waved Emma over. Unlike their mother, Lily had always tried her best with Emma, though the gap between them had widened after the accident. "I was worried you'd be late." "Wouldn't miss it," Emma said, embracing her sister carefully to avoid wrinkling the dress. "You look beautiful." "Thanks." Lily smiled, then lowered her voice. "Fair warning, Aunt Patricia and Uncle George are already 3 mimosas in, and they're asking about everyone's relationship status." Emma nodded, steeling herself. "Noted." "Emma, darling." As if summoned by their conversation, Aunt Patricia swooped in, champagne flute in hand. "Still using that thing, are we?" She gestured vaguely toward Emma's cane. "I read about this wonderful new therapy online." "Let's get the family photos started," Lily interrupted, shooting Emma an apologetic look. The next 30 minutes were an exercise in endurance as Emma was positioned and repositioned for various groupings. She noticed how the photographer carefully arranged people to minimize the visibility of her cane, how her mother kept suggesting she stand behind this person or maybe sit for this one. "Now just the parents and the bride," the photographer called out. Emma stepped back, relieved for the momentary respite. "You're looking well, all things considered," came a voice from behind her. Emma turned to find her cousin Diana, perfect in a designer dress, her expression a practiced mask of concern. "Thank you, I think," Emma replied, refusing to take the bait. "I admire you, really," Diana continued, sipping her champagne. "Coming to these events alone, knowing everyone's wondering why you never found someone after Marcus. It takes courage." Emma's grip tightened on her cane. "I appreciate your concern, Diana, but I'm perfectly happy with my life." Diana's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course you are. Oh, I should mention, James invited his boss, you know, Alexander Blackwood himself. Everyone's terrified." She laughed, the sound like tinkling glass. "Apparently he rarely attends these functions, but he and James have some big deal in the works. Try not to draw attention to yourself when he arrives. First impressions and all that." Before Emma could respond, her mother called her back for another photo, and Diana glided away. Mission accomplished. The casual cruelty stung, but Emma was used to it. What bothered her more was the revelation that Alexander Blackwood would be attending. The thought of the notorious CEO witnessing her family's thinly veiled embarrassment over her disability made her stomach churn. By the time the ceremony was set to begin, Emma was exhausted from the effort of maintaining her composure. She was directed to a seat in the third row on the bride's side. Not quite with the immediate family in the front row, but not relegated to the back either. A small mercy. "We have a seating problem," her mother appeared suddenly, voice low and urgent. "The groom's side needs another space in the front row for Mr. Blackwood, who just arrived. We need to move you to the back to free up space here." Emma stared at her mother in disbelief. "You want to move me to the back?" "Don't make a scene, Emma," Catherine hissed. "This is Lily's day, and Alexander Blackwood is an important man. It just makes sense to have you somewhere less visible." Emma felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her chest. 6 years of this treatment, and it still had the power to wound her. Because of my cane? Or because you're ashamed of me? "Don't be dramatic. It's just a practical matter of space," her mother insisted, though they both knew it was a lie. "James's parents specifically requested this." "Fine," Emma said, gathering her bag. "Wouldn't want to embarrass the family by having the disabled daughter in view of the important guests." As Emma struggled to rise from her seat, a hush fell over the gathering. She looked up to see what had caused the sudden silence and froze. Walking down the center aisle, commanding attention without effort, was a tall figure in an impeccably tailored black suit. Alexander Blackwood had arrived. Even from a distance, his presence was intimidating. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp features and penetrating dark eyes, he moved with the confidence of a man accustomed to power. His dark hair, touched with silver at the temples, was perfectly styled, and his expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. Every eye in the garden followed him as he approached. Emma tried to move out of the way quickly, but in her haste, her cane caught on the chair in front of her. She stumbled, nearly falling, and let out a small gasp of pain as she caught herself awkwardly with her weak arm. The sound drew Blackwood's attention. His gaze locked with hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks as she saw him take in her cane, her off-balance posture, and finally, her mother's mortified expression. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood," Catherine said hurriedly. "We're just rearranging the seating. My daughter was just moving to the back." Emma had never wanted to disappear more than in that moment. She braced herself for the dismissive glance, the polite but distant acknowledgement before he moved on to more important people. It was a look she knew well. But Alexander Blackwood did something entirely unexpected. His eyes, a striking gray that reminded Emma of storm clouds, narrowed slightly as they moved from her to her clearly embarrassed mother and back again. Something shifted in his expression, a hardening around his mouth, a flash of something dangerous in his gaze. "Is this how you treat family at Blackwood Estate?" Alexander's voice was low but carried clearly in the hushed garden. The question wasn't directed at Emma but at her mother, who blanched visibly. "Mr. Blackwood, I assure you," Catherine began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," he said, turning his full attention to Emma. "Alexander Blackwood." He extended his hand to her, ignoring Catherine completely. Emma hesitated before taking his offered hand. "Emma Wilson," she replied, acutely aware of everyone watching. His grip was firm but careful, as if he sensed her discomfort without drawing attention to it. "Miss Wilson, would you do me the honor of joining me in the front row?" His request, though it didn't sound like a request at all, silenced the murmurs that had begun around them. "I find I prefer company with substance during these affairs." Emma blinked in surprise. Was this some kind of joke? She glanced at her mother, whose expression had shifted from mortification to calculation. Catherine gave a tight nod, clearly unable to refuse the estate owner and James's boss anything. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Emma managed, unsure what else to say. "Alexander, please." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but softened his severe features momentarily. Without waiting for further discussion, he offered her his arm. a gesture so unexpected that Emma nearly forgot to accept it. As she placed her hand on his forearm, she felt the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. He adjusted his pace to hers without comment, allowing her to navigate the aisle with dignity instead of the rushed, awkward gait she usually adopted when people waited impatiently for her to move. The front row seemed miles away as they proceeded down the aisle together. Emma could feel the stares of the assembled guests burning into her back, especially Diana's, whose expression of shock and jealousy Emma caught from the corner of her eye. "Your family appears less than pleased," Alexander commented quietly as they walked. "You've just upended their carefully arranged social hierarchy," Emma replied without thinking, then bit her lip, worried she'd overstepped. To her surprise, Alexander made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Good," he said simply. They reached the front row, where James's parents were already seated along with his older brother. Their expressions as Alexander approached with Emma on his arm ranged from confusion to alarm. "Harrison," Alexander nodded to James's father, who stood immediately. "I trust you don't mind if Miss Wilson joins us. I've invited her personally." Harrison Maxwell looked like he wanted to object, but clearly thought better of it. "Of course not, Alexander. A pleasure, Miss Wilson." Emma doubted that very much, but nodded politely as Alexander guided her to a seat, taking the place beside her rather than next to the Maxwells as would have been expected. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Alexander Blackwood had just publicly aligned himself with the family outcast. "Why are you doing this?" Emma whispered as they sat, genuine confusion overriding her manners. Alexander's gaze remained forward, his profile sharp against the backdrop of flowers. "I recognize a fellow survivor when I see one," he said cryptically, then fell silent as the music began to signal the start of the ceremony. The wedding proceeded with the expected pageantry. Lily was radiant as she walked down the aisle on their father's arm, and the ceremony itself was beautiful. Emma tried to focus on her sister's happiness, but she couldn't help being hyper-aware of the imposing figure seated beside her. Alexander Blackwood remained perfectly still throughout, his attention seemingly on the proceedings, though Emma occasionally felt his gaze shift briefly toward her. When the ceremony concluded, the bride and groom proceeded back up the aisle to applause, followed by the wedding party. As guests began to rise for the reception, Emma steeled herself for the awkward moment when Alexander would make his polite excuses and move on to more important people. Instead, he stood and once again offered her his arm. "Shall we?" Emma hesitated. "You don't need to continue this, whatever it is. I'm sure you have more important people to talk to." "I rarely do things I don't want to do, Miss Wilson," he replied, his expression unreadable. "Not anymore." Before she could respond, her mother appeared before them, her smile too bright to be genuine. "Emma, darling, I need your help with something. Mr. Blackwood, I'm sure you'd like to speak with Harrison about the merger." "Actually," Alexander interrupted smoothly, "I was just about to escort your daughter to the reception. Business can wait until Monday, Catherine." Emma noted with interest that her mother didn't correct him for using her first name without invitation. Catherine's smile faltered only briefly before she recovered. "Of course. How thoughtful of you, Mr. Blackwood." As they walked toward the large tent set up for the reception, Emma couldn't contain her curiosity any longer. "How do you know my mother's name? I didn't think you'd met before today." "I make it my business to know everything about my business partners, including their families," Alexander replied. "James has worked directly under me for 3 years. I know quite a bit about the Wilsons and the Maxwells." "And yet you clearly don't approve of them," Emma observed. Alexander's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw something raw and genuine beneath his controlled exterior. "I don't approve of people who value appearances over humanity. I've seen too much of that in my life." The reception was in full swing by the time they entered the tent. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Alexander led Emma to a table that had clearly been reserved for VIPs, judging by its prime location near the dance floor. Emma felt the weight of curious stares as they crossed the room. Alexander Blackwood's reputation preceded him, the ruthless CEO who had built his technology empire from nothing, known for his brilliant mind and merciless business tactics. What could he possibly want with her? As if reading her thoughts, Alexander leaned closer. "People are wondering why I'm spending time with you." "I'm wondering the same thing," Emma admitted. "Perhaps I'm tired of insincere people who want something from me," he replied, pulling out a chair for her. "You, on the other hand, seem genuinely uncomfortable with my attention, which is refreshing." Emma laughed, despite herself. "That's a strange basis for companionship." "I find conventional approaches overrated." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. Before they could continue their conversation, James approached their table, his expression a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. "Mr. Blackwood, thank you again for attending today. It means a great deal to us." He glanced at Emma, clearly trying to puzzle out the situation. "I see you've met my new sister-in-law." "Indeed. You neglected to mention her in our previous discussions," Alexander noted, his tone making it clear this was a significant oversight. James shifted uncomfortably. Well, I didn't think. That is, I wasn't sure if I would be interested. You were mistaken." Alexander's voice had cooled noticeably. "Miss Wilson has proven to be the most genuine person I've encountered today." James looked between them, clearly recalibrating whatever he had previously thought about Emma. "Of course. Well, I should return to Lily. Please enjoy yourselves." He retreated quickly, headed straight for a group that included Emma's parents, no doubt to report this unexpected development. "You've just confused everyone's carefully constructed worldview," Emma commented once James was out of earshot. "They don't know what to make of the fearsome Alexander Blackwood showing interest in the family liability." "Is that how they see you? As a liability?" His voice had hardened again. Emma sipped her water, avoiding his intense gaze. "Not in so many words, usually, but actions speak loudly enough." "Tell me about the accident," Alexander said abruptly. When Emma looked surprised, he added, "As I said, I know some things about your family, including that you were injured 6 years ago, but I don't know the details." Emma hesitated, unused to anyone asking directly about her disability. Most people either pretended not to notice or avoided the subject entirely. "You don't need to answer if you prefer not to," Alexander added, and something in his tone told Emma he would genuinely respect her boundaries if she declined. "No, it's fine," she said, realizing she wanted to tell him. "I was a dancer. Ballet primarily, though I was exploring contemporary forms. I had just been accepted to the National Academy on scholarship when a drunk driver hit my car. Multiple fractures, nerve damage." She gestured vaguely to her leg and arm. "The doctors did their best, but some things couldn't be fully repaired." Alexander listened without interruption, his expression grave. "And your dancing career?" "Over before it began officially," Emma said, working to keep her voice steady. "I teach piano now at a community arts center. It's not what I dreamed of, but it's fulfilling in its own way." "You adapted," Alexander observed. "That requires strength many people don't possess." Before Emma could respond, the mother of the groom appeared at their table. "Alexander, dear, we're about to start the toasts. Wouldn't you prefer to join us at the family table?" Mrs. Maxwell cast a dismissive glance at Emma. "I'm exactly where I wish to be, Margaret," Alexander replied firmly. "But thank you for your concern." Margaret Maxwell's smile froze. "Well, of course, if you're sure. Though Emma must have many friends she'd like to catch up with." The suggestion that Emma should be the one to leave was thinly veiled. "Actually," Emma said with newfound confidence, drawing from Alexander's unwavering presence beside her, "I'm quite happy right here." Margaret retreated with as much dignity as she could muster, and Emma turned to find Alexander watching her with something like approval in his eyes. "Well done," he said quietly. The toasts began, with James's father speaking first, followed by Emma's father and several members of the wedding party. Throughout the speeches, Emma noticed how Alexander observed everyone with careful attention, as if cataloging their words and reactions for future reference. When the formalities concluded and the band began playing for the first dance, Emma found herself surprisingly comfortable in Alexander's company. His presence beside her was like a shield against the pitying looks and whispered comments she usually endured at family gatherings. "Would you care to dance?" Alexander asked as Lily and James took to the floor for their first dance as a married couple. Emma's heart sank. Here it was, the moment when her disability would become an issue. "I can't, not really, not anymore." "I wasn't suggesting a waltz," Alexander clarified. "Just a simple dance, nothing that would cause you discomfort." Emma searched his face for signs of pity but found none. "People will stare," she warned him. "Let them," he replied with a shrug. "I'm used to being watched. The question is whether you care what they think." "I've spent 6 years caring too much what they think," Emma admitted. "It's exhausting." Alexander stood and extended his hand to her. "Then perhaps it's time to stop." The challenge in his eyes was unmistakable. Emma took a deep breath and placed her hand in his. As he guided her carefully toward the edge of the dance floor, she felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. She hadn't attempted to dance in public since the accident, convinced she would only embarrass herself. As other couples joined the newlyweds on the floor, Alexander positioned them in a quiet corner where Emma could steady herself with one hand against a decorative column if needed. He took her other hand and placed his free hand lightly at her waist, maintaining a respectful distance. "Just a gentle sway," he suggested. "Nothing more." Emma nodded, focusing on the simple movement. It wasn't really dancing, not the way she used to dance, but as they moved slightly to the music, she felt something long dormant stir inside her, a whisper of the joy she had once found in movement. As they swayed gently to the music, Emma became aware of the curious glances directed their way. Alexander seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on her. There was something both unsettling and comforting about his intense concentration, as if nothing existed beyond their small corner of the dance floor. "People are staring," Emma murmured, feeling her cheeks warm. "They're staring because they're wondering what Alexander Blackwood could possibly see in Emma Wilson," he replied, his voice matter-of-fact. "They're too small-minded to recognize your worth independently of their preconceptions." "And what do you see?" The question slipped out before Emma could censor herself. Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Resilience, dignity despite adversity, a refusal to be defined by circumstance. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Rare qualities in my experience." The music changed to a slower melody, and more couples filled the dance floor. Alexander adjusted his hold on Emma, maintaining the gentle sway that accommodated her limitations without drawing attention to them. "You said earlier that you recognized a fellow survivor," Emma ventured, curiosity overcoming her usual reticence. "What did you mean by that?" Something flickered in Alexander's eyes, a shadow of memory quickly controlled. "Another time, perhaps," he said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed for now. Then, as if to soften the refusal, he added, "Some stories are better told in private." Emma nodded, accepting the boundary. She was no stranger to privacy herself, having learned to guard her vulnerabilities after years of having them exposed and discussed by well-meaning but insensitive family members. They continued their not-quite dance in companionable silence for a few minutes more. When the song ended, Alexander guided her back to their table with the same careful consideration he'd shown earlier. As they sat, Emma caught sight of her cousin Diana watching them with undisguised envy, whispering furiously to her husband, "Your cousin seems disturbed by our association." Alexander commented, following Emma's gaze. Emma sighed. Diana has always needed to be the center of attention. She's probably plotting how to lure you away as we speak. An exercise in futility, he replied with such dismissive certainty that Emma couldn't help but smile. The afternoon wore on with speeches, more dancing, and the traditional cutting of the cake. Throughout it all, Alexander remained at Emma's side, his attention unwavering. Several times, various executives and business associates approached their table, clearly hoping to engage the CEO in conversation. But Alexander consistently kept these interactions brief, returning his focus to Emma each time. "You're neglecting your networking opportunities," Emma observed after he politely dismissed yet another hopeful business contact. "I'm exactly where I want to be," Alexander replied. "Business can wait." As the reception continued, Emma found herself relaxing in Alexander's company. There was something refreshingly direct about him. He didn't engage in the usual social niceties or pretenses that Emma had grown accustomed to navigating. He asked questions about her life, her work, teaching music, and listened to her answers with genuine interest. "You mentioned you teach piano now," he said as they shared a slice of wedding cake. "Do you still dance at all? For yourself, I mean." The question caught Emma off guard. No one had asked her that in years. Most people assumed she'd given up dancing entirely after the accident. "Sometimes," she admitted quietly, "when I'm alone. Nothing like before, just movement that feels like remembering." Alexander nodded as if her answer made perfect sense to him. The body holds memory differently than the mind. Some things become part of you. Before Emma could respond, her mother materialized at their table, champagne glass in hand and smile firmly in place. "Emma, darling, I've been looking everywhere for you. Lily is about to throw the bouquet and she's insisting you participate." She turned to Alexander, her manner solicitous. "You won't mind if I steal her away for a few minutes, will you, Mr. Blackwood?" The implication that Emma required his permission wasn't lost on either of them. Alexander's expression cooled noticeably. "I believe that's for Emma to decide, wouldn't you agree?" Catherine's smile faltered. "Of course, I just thought—" "I'll pass on the bouquet toss, Mom," Emma interrupted gently but firmly. "You know how I feel about those traditions." "But your sister specifically asked—" "I'm sure Lily will understand," Emma said. "Please give her my love." Catherine's gaze darted between Emma and Alexander, clearly trying to determine whether Emma's newfound assertiveness was her own or influenced by the powerful man beside her. "Well, as you wish. I'll let her know." She retreated reluctantly, glancing back several times as she rejoined the gathering crowd around the dance floor. "Thank you," Emma said once her mother was out of earshot. "For what?" Alexander seemed genuinely puzzled. "For not assuming you had the right to decide what I should do," she explained. "It's a refreshing change." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, I gather that's been a common experience for you." "Since the accident, people tend to think they know what's best for me," Emma confirmed. "My family, doctors, well-meaning friends. Everyone has an opinion about my limitations and how I should navigate them." "Yet you've managed just fine making your own decisions," Alexander observed. Across the room a cheer went up as Lily prepared to throw her bouquet. A group of eager women, Diana prominently among them, gathered on the dance floor. Emma watched from a distance, feeling no regret about missing the spectacle. "You didn't want to participate because you find it demeaning or because you don't believe in marriage?" Alexander asked, his tone curious rather than judgmental. Emma considered the question. "Neither exactly. I just don't like being part of the desperate single women spectacle," she admitted. "Especially when my participation would be seen as particularly pathetic. The disabled sister who lost her fiancé along with her dancing career." "You were engaged?" There was an edge to Alexander's voice that hadn't been there before. "Briefly. Marcus left about a year after the accident. once it became clear that I wouldn't fully recover. Emma kept her tone deliberately light, though the memory still stung. He said he couldn't handle being a caretaker when he'd signed up for a dancer. Alexander's expression darkened. He sounds like a man of limited character who did you a favor by removing himself from your life. Emma laughed, surprised by the vehemence in his assessment. That's one way of looking at it, I suppose. It's the only sensible way, he insisted. A man who abandons his commitment because circumstances change isn't worthy of consideration. Something in the way he said it made Emma wonder if Alexander was speaking from personal experience, but before she could pursue the thought, a commotion across the room drew their attention. Diana had caught the bouquet and was making a show of her triumph, waving the flowers overhead while her husband applauded dutifully. "Your cousin appears quite pleased with herself," Alexander noted dryly. "Diana would never miss an opportunity to be the center of attention," Emma replied with a small shrug, "even though she's already married." The reception began to wind down as the afternoon faded into evening. Some guests had already departed, while others continued dancing or gathered in small conversation groups. Emma noticed Alexander checking his watch discreetly and felt a pang of disappointment. Of course he would need to leave soon. A man like Alexander Blackwood surely had more important commitments than spending an entire day with a stranger at a wedding. "I should let you go," she said, straightening in her chair. "I'm sure you have other obligations." "Actually," he replied, "I was wondering if you might consider continuing our conversation elsewhere. Perhaps dinner?" Emma stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "Dinner? With you?" The corner of Alexander's mouth quirked upward. "Unless you've had your fill of my company." "No, Emma faltered, trying to make sense of the invitation. "I assumed you'd be eager to escape this event." "The event, yes. Your company, no." His direct gaze made it impossible to doubt his sincerity. "Unless you'd prefer to remain here?" Emma glanced around the reception. Her parents were deep in conversation with the Maxwells, Lily and James were making the rounds to thank departing guests, and Diana was holding court with a group of cousins, gesturing animatedly with the bouquet still clutched in her hand. No one would miss her if she left. "Dinner sounds lovely," she decided, surprising herself with her boldness. "Excellent." Alexander stood and offered his hand to help her up, a gesture Emma had come to appreciate for its lack of condescension. "My car is waiting whenever you're ready." Emma gathered her small purse and nodded. "I should say goodbye to Lily first." "Of course." They made their way across the room to where the bride and groom were chatting with a group of friends. Lily's eyes widened with curiosity when she spotted Emma approaching with Alexander Blackwood. "I'm heading out, Lily," Emma said, embracing her sister carefully. "It was a beautiful wedding. I'm so happy for you." Lily hugged her back, then whispered in her ear, "What's going on with you and Alexander Blackwood? Mom's been in a state all afternoon." "We're just talking," Emma replied softly. "He's been unexpectedly kind." Lily pulled back, her expression a mixture of surprise and cautious approval. "Well, that's interesting. Call me tomorrow? I want details before we leave for our honeymoon." Emma nodded, then turned to James. "Congratulations. Take good care of my sister." James, who had been watching Alexander with a combination of respect and wariness, smiled nervously. "Absolutely. And, enjoy your evening?" Alexander shook James's hand formally. "Congratulations, James. We'll discuss the Peterson acquisition on Monday as planned." He nodded to Lily. "Mrs. Maxwell, thank you for a lovely event." As they turned to leave, Emma caught her mother's eye across the room. Catherine's expression was a complex mixture of confusion, calculation, and something that might have been hope. Emma gave her a small wave but didn't go over to say goodbye, a minor act of independence that felt significant. Outside, the evening air was cool and refreshing after the warmth of the crowded tent. Alexander guided Emma down a side path rather than through the main entrance, where a sleek black car waited, its driver standing at attention beside the open rear door. "Where would you like to go?" Alexander asked as he helped Emma into the luxurious interior. "I know several excellent restaurants in the city, or if you prefer something quieter, my chef at home could prepare something." Emma hesitated, unsure of the proper protocol in this situation. Dinner at his home seemed overly intimate for a first, whatever this was. But a public restaurant meant being seen with Alexander Blackwood, which would inevitably attract attention. A restaurant would be lovely, she decided, choosing the option that felt safest. "Though nothing too formal, I'm dressed for a wedding, not fine dining." "You look perfect," Alexander said with such simple certainty that Emma felt herself blush. He addressed his driver. "Pierre, take us to Riviera." As the car pulled smoothly away from Blackwood Estate, Emma watched the grand mansion recede in the distance. The day had taken an entirely unexpected turn, and she found herself in the company of a man who, just hours ago, had been nothing more than a fearsome reputation to her. Now, as they traveled toward the city, she wondered what exactly Alexander Blackwood saw in her that made her worthy of his attention, and what he might want in return. "Having second thoughts?" Alexander asked, noticing her pensive expression. "Just trying to process today," Emma admitted. "This morning I was dreading facing my family. Now I'm leaving with you, and I still don't quite understand why." "Because you intrigue me," he said simply, "and because I think we might have more in common than is immediately apparent." Before Emma could ask what he meant, Alexander's phone rang. He checked the screen, his expression hardening. "I need to take this. Excuse me." He answered with a curt "Blackwood" and listened for a moment, his posture tensing. "That's unacceptable," he said, his voice taking on the cold, authoritative tone Emma imagined he used in boardrooms. "I was very clear about the terms. No, I don't want excuses. Fix it." He ended the call abruptly, then turned to Emma with a hint of regret in his eyes. "I apologize for the interruption." "Business doesn't stop for weddings," Emma said with a small smile. "Unfortunately not," he agreed, though he seemed distracted by whatever the call had been about. The car entered the city, the skyline glittering against the darkening sky. Emma watched Alexander's profile, illuminated intermittently by passing streetlights. He was undeniably handsome in a severe way, but there was something more, a controlled intensity that suggested depths beneath his polished exterior. After a few minutes of silence, Alexander seemed to shake off whatever concerns the phone call had raised. He turned to Emma with renewed focus. "Tell me more about your music teaching. Do you find it fulfilling?" The conversation flowed easily as they drove toward the restaurant. Emma described her work at the Community Arts Center, teaching piano to students ranging from eager children to retirees fulfilling lifelong dreams. "It's not what I imagined for myself," she admitted, "but there's something deeply satisfying about helping others discover their own relationship with music, especially the children who struggle with traditional learning, seeing them connect with piano when they've been told they can't succeed at other things. It's meaningful." Alexander listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that suggested he was truly engaged with her story. "You've found purpose in redirecting your passion," he observed. "That's remarkably rare." "It was that, or give up entirely," Emma said simply. "And I couldn't do that." The car slowed as they approached Riviera, an elegant but understated restaurant overlooking the city's river. Emma had heard of it but never visited. Its reputation for exclusivity and discretion made it a favorite among the city's elite. The driver pulled up to the entrance, where a valet immediately stepped forward to open Emma's door. "Mr. Blackwood, welcome back," the maitre d' greeted them warmly as they entered. "Your usual table is ready." Alexander guided Emma through the dimly lit space with a light touch at the small of her back. The restaurant was tastefully decorated in muted tones of blue and gold, with well-spaced tables ensuring privacy for diners. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of the river and city lights beyond. Their usual table, Emma noted, was positioned in a secluded corner with an excellent view but removed from the main dining area. As Alexander helped her with her chair, she couldn't help but wonder how many women he had brought to this exact spot. "You come here often?" she asked as they settled in. "I own it," Alexander replied matter-of-factly, "along with several other restaurants in the city. But yes, I do dine here regularly. The chef is exceptional and I appreciate the privacy." A waiter appeared almost immediately with menus and a bottle of wine. "The Euro 9 Bordeaux you prefer, Mr. Blackwood," he said, presenting the bottle for inspection before pouring. Emma waited until the waiter had retreated before speaking again. "I'm beginning to understand why people find you intimidating," she said with a small smile. "The effortless command of every situation must be unnerving for those trying to impress you." Alexander's expression softened slightly. "Does it unnerve you?" "Strangely, no," Emma admitted. "Perhaps because I'm not trying to impress you." "Another refreshing quality," he murmured, raising his glass in a subtle toast. They ordered, Alexander recommending the sea bass for Emma and selecting the venison for himself, and fell into a comfortable rhythm of conversation. Emma found herself speaking more freely than she had with anyone in years, sharing details of her life after the accident, the challenges of rebuilding her identity, and her occasional frustrations with her family's attitudes. "They mean well most of the time," she said, defending her parents despite their shortcomings. "They just never knew how to handle it when the daughter they'd proudly told everyone would be a professional dancer suddenly couldn't fulfill that dream. I think my disability reminds them of failure, theirs and mine." "Your accident and resulting disability are not a failure," Alexander said firmly, "and your family's discomfort with it reflects their limitations, not yours." The directness of his statement was both startling and comforting. Emma took a sip of wine to hide her emotional reaction. "What about your family?" she asked, redirecting the conversation. "Do they share your directness?" Something shuddered in Alexander's expression. "My parents died when I was young. Car accident." He stated the facts without emotion, but Emma sensed the control it took to maintain that composure. "I was raised by my grandfather, who was demanding. He's gone now as well." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly, understanding now why he had recognized something in her at the wedding. They had both experienced life-altering loss. Alexander acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "It shaped me, certainly. My grandfather believed vulnerability was weakness, and weakness was unacceptable. He built Blackwood Enterprises from nothing and expected me to protect and expand his legacy. Failure was not an option." "That sounds like a heavy burden for a child," Emma observed. "It was the hand I was dealt," Alexander replied with a hint of his earlier detachment. Then, as if realizing the wall he'd momentarily erected, he added, "But it gave me purpose, direction, not unlike how your teaching gives you purpose now." Their meals arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. Emma appreciated the brief respite, using the time to process what she was learning about this complex man. Despite his power and privilege, Alexander Blackwood carried his own scars, invisible perhaps, but no less real. "This is delicious," she said after tasting the sea bass. "Your chef deserves his reputation." "I'll pass along your compliment," Alexander replied. "Laurent takes great pride in his work." As they ate, Alexander guided the conversation to lighter topics: books they had read, music they enjoyed, places they had visited. Emma was surprised to discover his knowledge of classical ballet, including some of the contemporary choreographers she had studied before her accident. "Most people assume ballet is all tutus and Swan Lake," she said, genuinely impressed. "But you actually know Forsyth's work." "I make it a point to be well informed about things that interest me," Alexander replied. There was something in his tone that made Emma wonder if she was now among those interests, a thought both flattering and slightly unnerving. The evening progressed pleasantly, and Emma found herself reluctant for it to end. Alexander was unlike anyone she had met since her accident. He neither ignored her disability nor made it the center of their interaction. He simply accepted it as part of who she was and adapted accordingly without drawing attention to the accommodation. As they finished their dessert, a shared chocolate soufflé that the chef had prepared specially, Alexander's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it with a slight frown. "Another crisis?" Emma asked. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow," he said, silencing the device and returning it to his pocket. "I apologize for the interruptions." "No need. I understand that you have responsibilities that don't pause for dinner companions." Alexander studied her for a moment. "Most people in my life expect my constant attention and availability. Your understanding is unusual." "Perhaps because I don't have any expectations?" Emma replied honestly. "This evening has been an unexpected gift, but I don't presume it means anything beyond what it is. A pleasant dinner with someone who, for reasons I still don't fully understand, found my company preferable to solitude tonight." Alexander's expression changed subtly, surprise followed by something warmer. "You continually defy expectations, Emma Wilson." The use of her first name sent an unexpected thrill through her. Until that moment, he had called her Miss Wilson, maintaining a slight formality despite their increasingly personal conversation. "Is that a good thing?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "It's a rare thing," he replied. "And yes, very good indeed." The waiter approached discreetly. "Is there anything else you require, Mr. Blackwood?" Alexander glanced at Emma questioningly. "No, thank you," she said, realizing with regret that the evening was drawing to a close. "Everything was wonderful." As the waiter retreated, Alexander leaned forward slightly. "Would you object to extending our evening? There's a place I'd like to show you, if you're not too tired." Curiosity outweighed Emma's natural caution. "I'm not tired at all." Alexander smiled, a real smile that transformed his severe features and reached his eyes. "Excellent." He settled the bill with a quiet efficiency that required no discussion of payment, then helped Emma from her chair with the same attentive consideration he had shown all day. As they exited the restaurant, the cool night air carried the scent of the river and early summer flowers. Alexander's car was waiting, the driver alert and ready despite the late hour. "Where are we going?" Emma asked as they settled into the back seat. "Somewhere special," Alexander replied cryptically, "a place few people have seen." The car wound through the city, eventually turning onto a road that led toward the mountains overlooking the metropolitan area. Emma watched the lights of the city recede as they climbed higher, curiosity building with each passing minute. Finally, they turned onto a private road marked only with a discreet B on the gate, which opened automatically as they approached. The driveway curved through wooded property until they emerged into a clearing where a stunning modern structure seemed to rise organically from the landscape. "Is this your home?" Emma asked, taking in the sleek lines of glass and steel that somehow harmonized with the natural surroundings. "One of them," Alexander confirmed as the car came to a stop. "But that's not what I brought you to see." The driver opened Emma's door, and Alexander came around to offer his arm. Instead of heading toward the main house, he guided her along a stone path that curved around the structure and into a garden area. The path was smooth and well lit, Emma noted with appreciation, easy to navigate even with her cane. They approached what appeared to be a smaller building set apart from the main house. Alexander pressed his hand against a panel by the door, which opened silently to his touch. He gestured for Emma to enter first. She stepped inside, and her breath caught. The space was a studio. Not just any studio, but a dancer's studio. One wall was mirrored, another made entirely of glass overlooking the city below. The floor was sprung maple, gleaming softly in the low lighting. Ballet bars lined one wall, and in the corner sat a baby grand piano. "Alexander," Emma whispered, unable to form a coherent thought as emotion washed over her. "I had it built 3 years ago," he explained quietly, standing beside her. "When I need to think or work through a problem, I come here. There's something about the space that clears my mind." "You dance?" Emma couldn't hide her surprise. Alexander's lips quirked into a half-smile. "No, but I appreciate the art form and what it represents. Discipline, precision, the perfect balance of strength and grace." Emma moved further into the room, drawn to the piano. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys without pressing down, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the instrument. "Please?" Alexander nodded. Emma settled onto the bench, arranged her cane beside her, and placed her hands on the keys. She began to play, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. The piece was one she often played for her advanced students, a Chopin nocturne that flowed like water through the quiet space. As she played, Emma felt Alexander watching her, not with pity or the awkward discomfort she often encountered, but with genuine appreciation. When the final notes faded, she looked up to find him standing closer than she expected, his expression thoughtful. "You play beautifully," he said. "Is this what you do when you dance for yourself now? Play music that your body remembers?" The insight was so accurate it momentarily robbed Emma of speech. She nodded, unable to voice how precisely he had understood something she had never fully articulated even to herself. "Would you like to try the floor?" Alexander asked gently. "No pressure, just an offer." Emma hesitated, looking at the perfect dance floor. It had been years since she had tried to dance in a proper studio, with mirrors that would reflect her altered movements and limitations back at her. The thought was both tempting and terrifying. "I couldn't," she began. "You can do whatever you choose," Alexander interrupted, his voice firm but kind. "This space is completely private. No one will see you but me, and I've already made it clear that I find nothing lacking in you, Emma." Emma stared at the polished floor, her reflection ghostly in its surface. Part of her wanted to retreat, to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment of confronting what she could no longer do. But Alexander's words resonated with her. The simple certainty that she was enough, just as she was. "I haven't danced in front of anyone since the accident," she admitted quietly. "Then I'm honored you might consider me worthy of being the first," Alexander replied. He moved to a panel on the wall and adjusted the lighting, dimming it slightly. "Or I can leave you alone, if you prefer." "No," Emma said quickly, surprising herself. "Stay. Just don't expect too much. I expect nothing. I only offer the opportunity." With that, he stepped back, giving her space. Emma rose from the piano bench and carefully placed her cane against it. The floor beneath her feet felt both familiar and foreign, a sensation from another life. She took a tentative step, then another, feeling the slight give of the sprung floor designed to protect dancers' bodies. She began with simple movements, small port de bras, gentle tendus. Her body remembered, even as it accommodated her new limitations. She kept her weight primarily on her strong leg, using her weakened one for balance and light gestures rather than weight-bearing. It wasn't ballet as she had once performed it, but it contained echoes of that former grace. As she moved, Emma deliberately avoided looking in the mirror. Instead, she closed her eyes, focusing on the sensation of movement, the music that played in her mind. She created a small phrase of movement, simple but intentional, allowing her body to find its new vocabulary. When she finally stilled and opened her eyes, she found Alexander watching her with an expression of profound respect. Not pity, not disappointment. Respect. "Thank you," he said simply. Emma blinked, surprised by his words. "For what?" "For sharing that with me." Alexander stepped closer, his voice soft. What I just witnessed was authentic artistry, perhaps different from what you once created, but no less valuable." Unexpected tears pricked at Emma's eyes. She had spent years mourning what she had lost, but Alexander somehow saw beauty in what remained. "I'm not the dancer I was," she said, needing to acknowledge the reality. "No," he agreed. "You're the dancer you are now, and from what I just saw, that dancer has something powerful to express." Emma shook her head, overwhelmed by his perception. "How is it that you see things others don't? Even I struggle to see what you seem to find so easily." Alexander was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. "When you've lived with people who only valued perfection, you learn to recognize the beauty in what others consider flawed." He gestured around the studio. "I built this space because I need beauty and expression in my life, even though I can't create it myself. My world is numbers, strategy, control. This," he indicated her, the space between them, "this is something else entirely." There was a vulnerability in his admission that touched Emma deeply. For all his power and command, Alexander Blackwood was sharing something personal, something he didn't show the world. "Would you play something else?" he asked, gesturing to the piano. "Something you'd dance to, if you could dance without limitations." Emma moved back to the piano, considering his request. After a moment, she began to play Debussy's Clair de Lune, her fingers finding the delicate notes with practiced ease. The music filled the studio, ethereal and haunting. As she played, Alexander moved to the center of the room. To her astonishment, he began to move, not dancing exactly, but a deliberate physical response to the music. His movements were those of someone with no formal training but a natural physical intelligence and a deep connection to the music. He was creating his own interpretation, uninhibited by concerns about technique or correctness. Emma continued playing, captivated by this unexpected side of him. When the piece concluded, Alexander stopped moving and met her gaze with a slightly self-conscious smile. "I told you I don't dance," he said. "But sometimes, in here alone, I move. It helps me think differently." The admission, so at odds with his public persona, touched Emma profoundly. "Thank you for showing me that," she said, echoing his earlier words. Alexander glanced at his watch. "It's getting late. I should take you home." Reality reasserted itself with those simple words. This magical evening was just that, an evening. Tomorrow they would return to their separate lives. Alexander to his empire, Emma to her modest apartment and teaching position. The thought brought a surprising pang of disappointment. "Of course," she agreed, reaching for her cane. "It's been a remarkable day." Alexander helped her to her feet with the same careful consideration he had shown all day. As they stood close together in the quiet studio, Emma felt a shift in the energy between them, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Emma," Alexander said, his voice lower than usual, "I'd like to see you again. Properly." "Properly?" she repeated, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Dinner, tomorrow evening, not as an unexpected extension of a wedding encounter, but as a deliberate choice." His directness was both intimidating and thrilling. "Would that interest you?" Emma considered the question seriously. Alexander Blackwood was unlike anyone she had ever known. Perceptive, challenging, complicated. Being with him today had awakened something in her that had been dormant since the accident, a sense of possibility. "Yes," she said simply. "It would." The smile that transformed his face made him look younger, less severe. "Good." The drive back to her apartment was companionable, with Alexander asking about her schedule for the week and sharing a few details of his own. It felt surreally normal, this conversation about ordinary logistics with a man whose name regularly appeared in business journals and whose decisions affected thousands of employees. When they arrived at her building, modest but well-maintained, Alexander insisted on walking her to her door despite the late hour. Emma was suddenly self-conscious about her apartment. It wasn't shabby, but it was certainly nowhere near the luxury Alexander was accustomed to. "This is me," she said as they reached her door on the third floor. The elevator had been working for once, sparing her the stairs she sometimes had to navigate when it was out of service. "What time do you finish teaching tomorrow?" Alexander asked. "My last student leaves at 5:30, Emma replied. "I'll pick you up at the Arts Center at 6 if that suits you." "That would be fine," she agreed, then hesitated. "Alexander, today has been unexpected. I'm still not entirely sure what you see in me that's worth pursuing." He studied her for a moment, his expression serious. "Intelligence, resilience, authenticity, a perspective different from my own. Beauty, both physical and internal." He delivered the assessment with the same straightforward confidence he seemed to apply to everything. "Do those reasons satisfy you?" Emma laughed softly, disarmed by his candor. "When you put it that way, how could they not?" "Good." Alexander leaned forward and, with a gentleness that contrasted with his imposing presence, brushed his lips against her cheek. "Good night, Emma. Sleep well." "Good night," she managed, her cheek tingling from the brief contact. She watched him walk back toward the elevator before unlocking her door and stepping inside. Once alone in her apartment, Emma leaned against the closed door, trying to process everything that had happened since she reluctantly set out for her sister's wedding that morning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Home safe? Call me tomorrow. Need all details about you and Blackwood." Emma smiled, sending back a simple thumbs-up emoji. There would be time for explanations tomorrow, though she wasn't sure she could explain what had happened today even to herself. She got ready for bed in a daze, her mind replaying moments from the day, Alexander defending her to her mother, their dance at the reception, the private dinner, and most of all, the dance studio where she had moved again in ways she had thought lost to her forever. As she drifted toward sleep, Emma realized that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to tomorrow with genuine anticipation rather than resigned acceptance. Morning arrived with startling clarity. Emma woke earlier than usual, her mind already racing with thoughts of the previous day and the evening to come. She had 5 students scheduled today, 3 children after school and 2 adults in the late afternoon, but her focus kept drifting to Alexander. Would he really follow through? Part of her still expected to receive a polite message explaining that he had reconsidered, that yesterday had been an aberration. After all, what place could she possibly have in the life of Alexander Blackwood? She was checking her phone for the 3rd time that morning when it finally buzzed with a message. Her heart leapt, then plummeted as she saw it was from her mother, not Alexander. "Call me as soon as you can. We need to discuss yesterday." Emma sighed, setting the phone aside without responding. She could imagine exactly what her mother wanted to discuss, her unexpected connection with Alexander and how the family might benefit from it. Catherine Wilson had always been pragmatic about social connections. After showering and dressing with more care than usual, Emma finally called her mother while eating a quick breakfast. "Emma, darling, finally," Catherine answered on the 2nd ring. "I've been waiting to hear from you. You left rather suddenly yesterday." "Good morning, Mom," Emma replied evenly. "Yes, I left with Alexander. He invited me to dinner." "So I gathered." James's father was quite surprised. Apparently, Alexander Blackwood doesn't socialize outside of business contexts very often. Catherine's tone was carefully neutral, but Emma could hear the unasked questions beneath the surface. "We had a pleasant evening," Emma said, deliberately vague. "Will you be seeing him again?" Her mother abandoned subtlety entirely. Emma considered how to respond. Part of her wanted to maintain her privacy, to keep this new and fragile connection shielded from her family's expectations and inevitable interference. But dishonesty didn't feel right either. "Actually, yes, we're having dinner again tonight." There was a pause, then Catherine's voice became even more controlled. "Emma, I don't want to pry, but be careful. A man like Alexander Blackwood doesn't typically spend time with women like you without an agenda. The words stung, even though Emma had half expected them. Women like me? You mean disabled women from middle-class backgrounds? You know that's not how I meant it, Catherine protested, though they both knew it was exactly what she meant. I'm simply concerned. You've been hurt before, and Alexander Blackwood has a reputation for being ruthless in business. I don't want to see you disappointed. I appreciate your concern, Emma said, trying to keep the edge from her voice. But I'm a grown woman capable of making my own decisions. Alexander has been nothing but respectful and considerate. Of course he has. He's a sophisticated man. Catherine paused. Just proceed with caution, that's all I'm saying. And perhaps mention to him that your father has been looking for new investors for his business expansion. If the topic comes up naturally, of course. Emma ended the call with her mother feeling a familiar mixture of frustration and resignation. Catherine's thinly veiled suggestion that she use her connection with Alexander for family business advantage was exactly the kind of thing Emma had come to expect. Her father's construction company had been struggling for years, caught between larger competitors and economic downturns. Of course, her mother would see Alexander primarily as a potential business asset. Putting the conversation aside, Emma gathered her teaching materials and headed to the Community Arts Center. The modest brick building had become her sanctuary over the past few years, a place where her disability rarely factored into how people perceived her. Her students saw her first and foremost as their teacher, not as a woman with a cane. Her morning passed quickly with administrative work and preparation for her afternoon lessons. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Good morning, Emma. Looking forward to this evening. I hope your day is going well. Alexander." Simple, direct, and unexpectedly warming. Emma saved the contact information and replied, "Good morning. My day is fine. Just preparing for students. Looking forward to tonight as well." She hesitated, wondering if she should ask where they were going so she could dress appropriately, then decided against it. Part of her was enjoying the unpredictability of this connection, so different from her carefully structured post-accident life. Her first student arrived at 2:30, 8-year-old Zoe, who had struggled with traditional learning methods but showed remarkable aptitude for music. As always, teaching centered Emma, bringing her fully into the present moment. She guided Zoe through her scales and a simple piece they'd been working on, celebrating the girl's progress with genuine enthusiasm. "Miss Emma, are you happy today?" Zoe asked unexpectedly as their lesson was ending. "I am," Emma replied, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask?" "You're smiling more," the child observed with the directness only children possess. "And you're wearing the pretty hair clip." Emma touched the decorative clip she had indeed chosen with more care than usual that morning. "You're very observant, Zoe. Yes, I am happy today." "Is it because of a boy?" Zoe asked with an impish smile. "Not a boy," Emma corrected with a small laugh. "A man." The distinction felt important somehow. "My mom says when grown-ups smile for no reason it's usually because of love or cake," Zoe declared with authority. "And you don't have cake." Before Emma could formulate a response to this profound piece of 8-year-old wisdom, Zoe's mother arrived to collect her. The remaining lessons proceeded without such philosophical insights, though Emma found herself smiling more than usual, just as Zoe had observed. Her last student, retired Professor Harold Jenkins, noticed it too. "Something's different about you today, Emma," he commented as they wrapped up his lesson. "You have a lightness about you." "Just having a good day, Harold," Emma replied, though she knew it was more than that. The anticipation of seeing Alexander again had infused her with an energy she hadn't felt in years. As her students departed and she organized her materials, Emma checked her watch. 5:45. Alexander would arrive in 15 minutes. Her pulse quickened at the thought. Hot date? The question came from Diane, the center's director, who was passing by Emma's teaching room. "Just dinner," Emma replied, trying for nonchalance. Diane raised an eyebrow. "With the imposing man in the expensive suit who just pulled up outside? Because if that's just dinner, I need to seriously reconsider my dating standards." Emma moved to the window and saw Alexander's car parked in front of the center, 15 minutes early. He was standing beside it, phone in hand, looking every inch the powerful executive in a perfectly tailored dark suit. "He's early," Emma murmured, suddenly nervous. "Well, don't keep him waiting on my account," Diane said with a grin. "And I expect details tomorrow." Emma gathered her things quickly, checking her appearance in the small mirror she kept in her teaching room. She had dressed more carefully than usual that morning, a sleeveless navy dress that fell just below her knees, paired with a light cardigan and comfortable but elegant flats. Her hair was swept up in a simple style that kept it off her face while softening her features. Taking a deep breath, she made her way to the entrance. Through the glass doors, she could see Alexander looking up from his phone, tucking it away the moment he spotted her. The intensity of his gaze, even at a distance, sent a flutter through her stomach. She pushed through the doors and was greeted by his slight smile, the one she was beginning to recognize as genuine rather than polite. "Emma," he said simply, his voice warming her name in a way that felt intimate despite the public setting. "You're early," she replied, unable to think of anything more clever. "I prefer to be prompt," Alexander answered. He took her bag from her shoulder without asking, carrying it with the same effortless courtesy he had shown the day before. "I hope you don't mind, but I've made a slight change of plans for this evening." "Oh," Emma tried to hide her uncertainty. "The restaurant I had planned for us is having some ventilation issues," he explained. "I've arranged an alternative, but it's a bit of a drive. Is that acceptable?" The consideration in his question, giving her a genuine choice rather than simply redirecting her, touched Emma. "That's fine," she agreed. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise," Alexander replied, opening the car door for her. "But I think you'll approve." As they settled into the car and pulled away from the arts center, Emma was aware of curious glances from some departing students and their parents. By tomorrow, rumors would be swirling about the piano teacher's mysterious, wealthy companion. She found she didn't mind. "How was your day?" she asked, as they merged onto the highway heading out of the city. "Productive," Alexander replied. "A minor crisis with a supply chain issue in our Tokyo office, but nothing insurmountable." He glanced at her. "And yours? How were your students today?" Emma told him about Zoe's philosophical observations and Harold's improving Bach interpretation, surprised by how easily conversation flowed between them. Alexander listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest in her work. As they drove further from the city, Emma's curiosity grew. "Are you kidnapping me?" she asked teasingly after they had been driving for nearly 40 minutes. Alexander's mouth quirked in that almost smile. "Would you object if I were?" "That depends on your intentions," she replied lightly. "Only honorable ones, I assure you." His tone remained playful, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that sent a shiver of anticipation through Emma. They turned off the highway onto a winding country road that eventually led to a gate similar to the one at Alexander's mountain home, though this one opened onto a different property. The driveway curved through woodland before opening onto a breathtaking vista. A lake gleamed in the early evening light, its surface reflecting the surrounding mountains and the setting sun. On the shore stood a rustic but elegant structure that appeared to be a restaurant, with a large deck extending over the water. Several tables were set up on the deck, but as Alexander parked, Emma noticed that there didn't seem to be any other patrons. "Where are we?" she asked, as Alexander came around to open her door. "Lakeview Lodge," he replied, offering his hand to help her from the car. "A hidden gem that few people know about." "It seems very exclusive," Emma observed, noting the absence of other guests. "It is tonight," Alexander confirmed. "I've arranged for a private dinner." The implication was clear. He had reserved the entire restaurant just for them. Emma wasn't sure whether to be impressed or overwhelmed by such a gesture. "That seems excessive," she said honestly. Alexander studied her face. "Too much?" "I don't need grand gestures," Emma explained. "I was looking forward to simply spending time with you, not all this." She gestured toward the restaurant. For a moment, Alexander looked uncertain, an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. "I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. I'm accustomed to controlling environments." He hesitated. "I can arrange something else, if you prefer." The vulnerability beneath his composed exterior touched Emma. This powerful man, who commanded an empire and struck fear in business competitors, was genuinely concerned that he might have misjudged her preferences. "It's beautiful," she assured him, placing her hand on his arm. "Just unexpected. I'm not used to such attention to detail." Relief flickered across his features. "Then shall we?" He offered his arm. The interior of the lodge was as impressive as its setting. Rustic elegance with soaring wooden beams, a massive stone fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the lake view. A single table was set near the windows, candles already lit despite the lingering daylight. The chef greeted them personally, a jovial man named Carlo, who seemed delighted to see Alexander. "Everything is prepared as you requested, Mr. Blackwood. The wine is breathing, and we'll serve the first course whenever you're ready." "Thank you, Carlo. We'll start in a few minutes." Alexander guided Emma to the table, holding her chair with practiced ease. Once they were seated, Emma took in the spectacular view. The sun was beginning to set, casting golden light across the water. "This is breathtaking," she admitted. "How did you find this place?" "I own it," Alexander replied. Emma laughed, then realized he was serious. "You own a lot of restaurants." "Among other things," he agreed with a slight smile. "This one was a passion project. The property was about to be developed into luxury condominiums that would have destroyed the natural setting. I purchased it instead and restored the original lodge." "That's surprisingly sentimental," Emma observed. Alexander's expression turned thoughtful. "I'm not usually described as sentimental, but certain things deserve preservation." Their conversation paused as servers brought the first course, an exquisite seafood appetizer that Carlo explained in detail before retreating to allow them privacy. "You went to considerable trouble for tonight," Emma noted as they began to eat. "I'm curious why." Alexander considered her question, taking a sip of his wine before answering. "I wanted to create a space where we could talk without distractions or observers. Yesterday at the wedding, we were surrounded by people with their own agendas and expectations. Even at Riviera, though I own it, there were staff and other diners. Here, we have privacy." "And what did you want to talk about that requires such privacy?" Emma asked, genuinely curious. Alexander met her gaze directly. "Us." The simple word hung between them, laden with implication. Emma felt her heart rate accelerate slightly. "Is there an us to discuss?" she asked, striving for a lightness she didn't quite feel. "I believe there could be," Alexander replied with characteristic directness. "I find myself thinking about you when I should be focusing on work. That hasn't happened to me in a very long time." Emma's breath caught at his honesty. Most men she'd known, admittedly not many since Marcus, approached relationships with careful strategies and measured revelations. Alexander's straightforward admission caught her off guard. "I've been thinking about you too," she admitted, matching his honesty with her own. "But I'm not sure what that means, practically speaking." Alexander nodded as if he'd anticipated her concern. "You're wondering how someone like you fits into my life or whether I fit into yours. Our worlds are very different," Emma agreed. "You control entire companies and apparently buy restaurants and lodges on impulse. I teach piano to children and retirees and live in an apartment where the elevator works approximately 60% of the time." A ghost of a smile touched Alexander's lips. "I could fix that elevator." "That's exactly my point," Emma said. "You can fix things most people just have to accept. You live in a different reality." The servers returned with their main course, locally sourced trout prepared with herbs and lemon, accompanied by seasonal vegetables. Emma welcomed the brief interruption, using the moment to gather her thoughts. When they were alone again, Alexander spoke. "Different circumstances don't preclude connection, Emma. If we allow external factors to dictate our choices, we surrender our agency." "That's a very CEO perspective," Emma observed, though not unkindly. "Some of us have learned to accept limitations." "I don't see your hesitation as a limitation," Alexander replied thoughtfully. "It's prudence. You're right to question whether we could build something meaningful across such different life experiences." Emma appreciated his understanding. "So where does that leave us?" "With a choice," he said simply. "We can acknowledge this attraction and part ways, preserving the memory of 2 unusual days. Or we can explore what might be possible with clear eyes about the challenges." There was no pressure in his voice, no attempt to persuade. He was laying out options as he might in a business negotiation, yet Emma sensed the stakes felt higher to him than he was letting on. "What would that exploration look like?" she asked, curious despite her reservations. "Dinner like tonight? Conversations? Learning each other's worlds?" Alexander's eyes held hers steadily. "I'd like to see where this connection leads, but at a pace that respects your comfort." "And if it leads nowhere?" Emma pressed. "If we discover that the gaps between our lives are too wide?" "Then we part as friends who respect each other," he answered without hesitation. "No regrets for having tried." Emma considered his words as she tasted the perfectly prepared trout. The idea of dating Alexander Blackwood seemed surreal, yet the man sitting across from her didn't feel like a distant, untouchable figure anymore. He felt like someone she was coming to know and, increasingly, to care about. "There's something else we should address," she said finally. "My disability isn't going away. On good days, it's barely noticeable. On bad days..." She trailed off, thinking of mornings when pain made every movement an effort. "I've had relationships fail because of it." Alexander's expression hardened momentarily, and Emma guessed he was thinking of Marcus. "Your ex-fiancé lacked character, as I said before. Your disability is part of who you are, not a defect to be overlooked or endured." "That's a generous perspective," Emma said softly. "It's the only reasonable one," Alexander countered. "We all carry marks from our histories, Emma. Some are just more visible than others." There was something in his tone that suggested personal knowledge beyond sympathy. Emma remembered his mention of losing his parents young and being raised by a demanding grandfather. "You said yesterday that your grandfather was demanding," she ventured, sensing an opening to understand him better. "What was that like?" Alexander was quiet for a moment, his expression carefully neutral. Then, as if making a decision, he set down his fork and met her gaze directly. "My grandfather built Blackwood Enterprises from nothing after emigrating here with empty pockets. He was brilliant, driven, and unforgiving of weakness." Alexander's voice was measured, controlled. "When my parents died, I was 8. I went from a relatively normal childhood to living with a man who saw emotions as inefficiencies and affection as indulgence." Emma's heart ached at the image of a grieving child thrown into such a cold environment. That sounds incredibly difficult for a child who'd just lost everything. "I survived," Alexander said simply. "I learned his lessons well, perhaps too well. Control, excellence, never showing vulnerability." His mouth quirked in a humorless smile. "It made me very effective in business and very ineffective in personal relationships. Yet here you are, being remarkably open about difficult things," Emma observed gently. Something shifted in Alexander's expression. a softening around his eyes. Here I am, indeed, surprising myself as much as anyone. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers, an invitation rather than a presumption. Something about you makes me want to be understood, Emma. I haven't felt that way in a very long time. Emma placed her hand in his, the simple contact sending warmth up her arm. I feel the same way with you. It's unexpected. Alexander's fingers closed gently around hers, and for a moment, they simply sat in comfortable silence, the connection between them speaking more eloquently than words. The spell was broken by the discreet approach of the servers bringing dessert, a delicate lemon tart with fresh berries. Alexander reluctantly released her hand, but his eyes held hers with an intensity that maintained their connection. As they enjoyed the dessert, the conversation turned to lighter topics: favorite books, travel experiences, small stories from their respective worlds. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in months as Alexander recounted a disastrous business trip to Tokyo where cultural misunderstandings had led to him accidentally insulting an important client. "Wait," she said, still smiling. "The fearsome Alexander Blackwood made a mistake. I thought that was against your personal code." "I make plenty of mistakes," he replied, his own smile softening his features. "I just ensure they happen far from public view. Unlike me, who crashed spectacularly on stage during my final student showcase before graduation," Emma said, surprising herself by voluntarily bringing up a painful memory. "Turned out my point shoe ribbon had been deliberately cut, a jealous classmate's idea of competitive strategy." "What did you do?" Alexander asked, his expression darkening at the sabotage. "I got up, finished the variation despite my ankle bleeding through the shoe, and then confronted her backstage." Emma's smile turned wry. "My mother was mortified when I called her out publicly. She thought I should have handled it gracefully, meaning privately. I would have acquired her dance school and had her banned from every company in the country," Alexander said with such matter-of-fact certainty that Emma laughed again. "And that's the difference between us," she pointed out. "Your solutions involve leveraging power. Mine involve direct confrontation and then moving on." "Both valid approaches," Alexander conceded, "though I stand by mine." As the evening progressed, Emma found herself forgetting about the grandness of the setting, the private restaurant, the clear display of Alexander's wealth and influence. Instead, she focused on the man himself, the subtle humor beneath his serious exterior, the attentive way he listened, the unguarded moments when he shared pieces of himself she suspected few people ever saw. After dessert, Alexander suggested they take a short walk along the lake shore. The sun had set, but soft landscape lighting illuminated a path along the water's edge. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and water. "Will the path be manageable for you?" Alexander asked, nodding toward her cane. Emma appreciated his practical consideration, asking directly rather than assuming, or worse, suggesting they skip the walk entirely. "It looks flat enough. I should be fine." They walked slowly, Alexander naturally adjusting his pace to hers without comment. The sound of water lapping against the shore and the distant calls of nightbirds created a peaceful backdrop to their conversation. "This place is magical," Emma said, pausing to look out over the moonlit lake. "I can see why you saved it from development." "My grandfather would have called it sentimentality," Alexander replied. "A weakness for aesthetic over practical value. But some places deserve to exist simply for what they are, not for what they can become." Emma glanced at him, struck by the philosophy behind his words. "I think I'm beginning to understand you, Alexander Blackwood." "A dangerous proposition," he said lightly, though his eyes remained serious. "Few people have tried." "Few people have been invited to," Emma countered gently. Alexander didn't deny it. Instead, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You're very perceptive, Emma Wilson." The touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. They stood close together at the lake's edge, the tension between them palpable and sweet. Emma found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. Alexander's phone shattered the moment, its harsh ring cutting through the peaceful night. He closed his eyes briefly in evident frustration before pulling it from his pocket. "I need to take this," he said after checking the screen. "It's my Tokyo office. One moment." Emma nodded, stepping back to give him privacy. She walked a few paces down the shore, listening to the water while trying not to overhear his conversation. Even from a distance, she could tell the call wasn't going well. Alexander's posture had straightened, his voice taking on the authoritative tone she'd heard briefly in the car the previous evening. After several minutes, he rejoined her, his expression once again composed, though tension lingered around his eyes. "I apologize for the interruption." "Is everything all right?" Emma asked. "A situation that requires my attention?" he replied, clearly weighing his words. "Unfortunately, it means I need to return to the city sooner than I'd planned. I have a video conference at 11. Emma checked her watch. It was nearly 9. "Of course, we should head back." Alexander's expression clouded with regret. "This is the reality of my life, Emma. Interruptions, crises, demands that can't be postponed." "I understand," she assured him. "Really, I do." As they walked back toward the lodge, Emma felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere between them. The carefree moments of connection were overshadowed by the reminder of Alexander's responsibilities and the demands of his position. The drive back to the city was comfortable but quieter than their journey out, with Alexander occasionally checking his phone for updates on whatever situation had arisen. Emma found herself wondering if this was what a relationship with him would truly be like. Magical moments punctuated by urgent business matters, his attention divided between her and an empire that depended on him. "I'm sorry the evening was cut short," Alexander said as they approached her apartment building. "That wasn't my intention." "It was still a lovely evening," Emma replied honestly. "One of the most memorable I've had in a long time." Alexander parked in front of her building but made no move to exit the car. "May I call you tomorrow, after I've resolved this situation?" "I'd like that," Emma said, realizing she meant it despite her lingering reservations. The car fell silent for a moment, both of them aware of the crossroads they faced. Then Alexander reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I meant what I said earlier, Emma. I want to explore what might be possible between us." His voice was low, intense. "If you're willing." Emma looked into Alexander's eyes, seeing both intensity and vulnerability there, a combination that made her heart race. In that moment, her reservations seemed less important than the connection they had formed in just 2 days. "I'm willing," she said softly, "but we should proceed carefully." Relief flickered across Alexander's features. "Agreed." He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture both old-fashioned and deeply affecting. "I should walk you up." "You have a crisis to manage," Emma reminded him. "I'm perfectly capable of making it to my apartment alone." Alexander's mouth quirked in that almost smile she was coming to recognize. "Indulge me. I was raised with certain principles about seeing a woman safely to her door." "Your grandfather again?" Emma asked as they exited the car. "Actually, my father?" Alexander's expression softened at the mention. "He was very different from my grandfather, warm, considerate. My few memories of him involve small courtesies he insisted upon. Opening doors, standing when a woman entered the room, always seeing my mother safely inside before leaving on trips." The image of a young Alexander learning these lessons from a father he would lose too soon touched Emma deeply. "Then I'll accept your gallantry," she said, taking his offered arm. At her door, the tension between them shifted into something expectant. Alexander stood closer than strictly necessary, his gaze moving from her eyes to her lips with unmistakable intent. "I've been wanting to kiss you properly since yesterday," he admitted, his voice lower than usual. Emma's breath caught. "What stopped you?" "I didn't want you to think it was only physical attraction," he replied, "though that's certainly part of it." The honesty was refreshing. Emma found herself leaning slightly toward him. "And now?" "Now I hope you understand it's much more than that." His hand came up to cup her cheek, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished. Instead, Emma tilted her face up toward his. "I'm beginning to." Alexander closed the distance between them slowly, his lips meeting hers with gentle restraint that barely concealed a deeper hunger. The kiss was careful, almost reverential at first, then gradually deepened as Emma responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, Emma felt slightly dazed. Alexander's eyes had darkened, and his composure seemed less perfect than usual. "That was," she began, then faltered, unable to find adequate words. "Yes," Alexander agreed, his voice rough. "It was." He stepped back slightly, visibly gathering his control. "I should go. My team is waiting, and if I stay longer—" He didn't finish the thought, but his meaning was clear. "Call me tomorrow?" Emma asked, surprised by her own eagerness. "Count on it." Alexander pressed one more quick kiss to her lips before turning to leave. "Good night, Emma." She watched him walk to the elevator, noting how even in this moment of departure, his posture remained impeccable, his movements precise. Only the slight tension in his shoulders revealed that their kiss had affected him as deeply as it had her. Once inside her apartment, Emma leaned against the closed door, her fingers touching her lips where his had been moments before. She felt both grounded and weightless, certain and confused, a contradiction of emotions that somehow made perfect sense given the man who had inspired them. Her phone chimed with a text from Alexander. "Home safe. Thank you for a wonderful evening." The simple message made her smile. She replied with equal simplicity, "Likewise. Good luck with your crisis." Morning arrived with a clarity that made the previous evening seem almost dreamlike. Had she really spent another evening with Alexander Blackwood, shared a kiss that made her toes curl, and agreed to explore a relationship with him? The evidence was on her phone. 3 text messages exchanged after he'd left, each brief but meaningful. As Emma prepared for her day, she found herself moving with more energy than usual, humming as she made coffee. The day ahead included morning administrative work at the Arts Center and afternoon teaching. Alexander had mentioned he would be tied up with the Tokyo situation until at least mid-afternoon, so she didn't expect to hear from him until later. She had just finished breakfast when her phone rang, her sister Lily. "Emma Wilson, you have been avoiding my calls," Lily began without preamble. "I've been dying to hear about you and Alexander Blackwood, and Mom is being weird and cryptic about the whole thing." Emma laughed. "Good morning to you too, Lily. Shouldn't you be on your honeymoon?" "We leave tonight, Paris for 2 weeks, but I couldn't go without getting the scoop on what happened after you left the reception. Mom says you've gone on another date with him? Is that true?" "Yes," Emma admitted, settling onto her sofa. "We had dinner last night." "At the house in the woods," Lily said, clearly delighted to have some information. "James found out from his father, who heard it from the caretaker. Apparently, Alexander reserved the entire lodge just for the 2 of you." Emma sighed. Of course, word had spread already. "Yes, he did. It was unexpected." "It's romantic is what it is," Lily insisted. "Do you have any idea how unusual this is? James says Alexander never dates. Like, ever. He's notorious for it. There are rumors he had his heart broken years ago, but no one knows the details." That piqued Emma's curiosity, though she tried not to show it. "We're just getting to know each other, Lily. It's early days." "Early days with the most eligible bachelor in the country," Lily pointed out, "who also happens to be James's boss, which makes this all very interesting from my perspective. James can't decide whether to be nervous or thrilled." Why would he be nervous? Emma asked. Because Alexander Blackwood took one look at how our family treats you and clearly disapproved, Lily explained. James is worried there could be professional repercussions. The implication that Alexander might use his power to punish James for the family's behavior troubled Emma. I'm sure that's not the case. Alexander separates business from personal matters. Does he? Because from what James says, Alexander Blackwood is known for holding grudges against people who cross him or those he cares about. Emma frowned. It was true that Alexander had shown a protective streak toward her at the wedding, but she couldn't imagine him jeopardizing James's career over family dynamics that predated his marriage to Lily. I'll make sure he knows that James has always been kind to me, Emma assured her sister. Which is true, by the way. Lily's voice softened. I know I haven't always been the best sister, Emma, especially after your accident. I got caught up in my own life and didn't know how to help you. You've never been unkind, Emma replied honestly. Just distant sometimes. Well, that's going to change, Lily declared. Starting with daily updates about you and Alexander Blackwood. I want every detail. Emma laughed. I'm hanging up now. Enjoy Paris. After ending the call, Emma sat thoughtfully for a few minutes. Lily's comment about Alexander's reputation for holding grudges added another dimension to her understanding of him. There was a hardness beneath his controlled exterior. She had glimpsed it briefly when he spoke of her ex-fiancé Marcus. It was part of what made him so formidable in business, but what would it mean in a personal relationship? These thoughts accompanied her as she went about her morning, and by the time she arrived at the Arts Center, she had resolved to simply ask Alexander directly about it when they next spoke. Their relationship, whatever it might become, needed honesty as its foundation. Diane caught her as she entered the building. There you are. I was beginning to think you might have run off with your mysterious suitor. Emma rolled her eyes. It was just dinner, Diane. Uh-huh. And that's why you're practically glowing this morning. Diane grinned. Also, you should know that everyone is talking about you. Everyone? Well, everyone here. Zoe told her mother that you were happy because of a man, not a boy, and Mrs. Peterson is convinced you're secretly engaged to some European aristocrat. Emma groaned. Wonderful. Oh, and this arrived for you about 10 minutes ago. Diane handed her a long white box tied with a navy ribbon. I've been dying to know what's inside, but I restrained myself. Barely. Emma took the box with surprise. It was heavy and clearly expensive, the ribbon made of thick satin. A small card was tucked beneath it, bearing her name in elegant handwriting. Aren't you going to open it? Diane prodded. Later, Emma decided, not wanting an audience for whatever Alexander had sent. Diane sighed dramatically. You're killing me, Emma. At least tell me if it's from him. I assume so, Emma replied, tucking the box under her arm. Now, don't we have a staff meeting to prepare for? The morning passed in a blur of administrative tasks and teaching preparation, the mysterious box sitting on Emma's desk like a beautiful distraction. Finally, during her lunch break, she closed her office door and carefully untied the ribbon. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a first edition of T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, a book they had discussed briefly the previous evening when comparing favorite poets. Emma lifted it carefully, admiring the pristine condition of this rare volume. Beneath it was a note in the same elegant handwriting as the card. Emma, you mentioned your fondness for Eliot last night, particularly these poems. I hope this edition brings you pleasure. The passage on page 42 made me think of you. Alexander. Emma turned to the indicated page and found a section lightly underlined in pencil. For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction fit, lost in a shaft of sunlight, the wild time unseen, or the winter lightning, or the waterfall, or music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. Tears pricked at Emma's eyes. The gift was thoughtful beyond measure, not a showy display of wealth like flowers or jewelry might have been, but something deeply personal that showed he had listened and understood her interests. The passage he had chosen spoke to presence and authenticity, qualities she strived for in her post-accident life and had sensed in him despite his carefully controlled exterior. She was still holding the book when her phone rang. Alexander. "Hello?" she answered, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "Emma," he replied, her name sounding like a caress in his deep voice. "I hope I'm not interrupting your day." "Not at all. I'm on my lunch break." She ran her fingers over the book's cover. "I just opened your gift. It's perfect. Thank you." "You like it?" There was a note of genuine inquiry in his voice, as if he had been uncertain of her reaction. "It's the most thoughtful gift I've ever received," Emma told him honestly. "The passage you marked, it's beautiful." "It reminded me of watching you at the piano," Alexander said. "That complete presence in the moment, becoming the music itself." Emma felt herself blush at the observation. "The Tokyo crisis? Is it resolved?" "For now," he replied, "though I may need to fly there next week if the situation deteriorates again." "That's quite a commute for a meeting," Emma observed lightly. Alexander chuckled, the sound warming her even through the phone. "One of the realities of global business. I was calling to see if you might be free tomorrow evening. I know it's short notice, but I'd like to see you before the weekend." "I'm free," Emma said, perhaps too quickly. "What did you have in mind?" "I thought you might like to see my other passion besides business," Alexander replied, a hint of something like nervousness in his tone. "I support a small contemporary dance company. They're having a private dress rehearsal tomorrow evening for their new production. Would that interest you?" The thoughtfulness of the invitation, offering to share an art form she loved but might find painful to watch, touched Emma deeply. "I'd love that," she said softly. "Good." The relief in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. "I'll pick you up at 6. The rehearsal starts at 7, and I thought we might have a light dinner first." 6 is perfect. After they ended the call, Emma sat holding the book, marveling at the way Alexander continued to surprise her. Just as she was about to return to work, her phone rang again. Her mother this time. Emma sighed, bracing herself before answering. "Hi, Mom." "Emma, darling." Catherine's voice was warm with an enthusiasm that immediately put Emma on guard. "I've been trying to reach you. How are you?" "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy with work." Emma kept her tone neutral, knowing what was likely coming. "Of course, dear. Listen, your father and I are hosting a small dinner party this Saturday. Just a few friends and business associates. We'd love for you to join us." Catherine paused meaningfully. "And please feel free to bring Alexander if he's available." There it was, the real reason for the call. "Mom, Alexander and I have only been on 2 dates. It's a bit soon to be dragging him to family dinner parties, don't you think?" "It's hardly dragging him if he'd enjoy himself," Catherine countered. "Your father has been wanting to discuss some potential business opportunities, and this would be a relaxed setting for an introduction." Emma sighed. "Alexander isn't a business opportunity, Mom. He's someone I'm getting to know on a personal level." "Of course he is, dear, but there's no harm in mixing business with pleasure. That's how the world works at his level." The subtle condescension in her mother's tone, the implication that Emma couldn't possibly understand how things worked in Alexander's sphere, ignited a spark of irritation. "Actually, Mom, I think Alexander would prefer to keep business and personal matters separate, at least where I'm concerned." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "Emma, I'm trying to help here. Your father's company has been struggling, as you know. A connection with someone like Alexander Blackwood could make an enormous difference." "I understand that," Emma replied, softening slightly. "But I'm not going to use my personal relationship as a business networking opportunity. If things progress between us, there may be natural moments for introductions, but not a staged dinner party designed to pitch Dad's business. "Well," Catherine said, clearly displeased, "I suppose we can revisit this another time. Will we at least see you on Saturday?" Emma considered refusing but decided against it. Standing her ground on Alexander was one thing. Cutting off her family entirely was another. "Yes, I'll be there. What time?" 7 o'clock. And Emma? Her mother's voice took on a note of genuine concern. "Be careful. I know Alexander Blackwood seems attentive now, but men like him, they live in a different world. I don't want to see you hurt again." The warning surprised Emma with its apparent sincerity. "I appreciate your concern, Mom. I'm going into this with open eyes." After ending the call, Emma sat thoughtfully for a few minutes. Her mother's warning, although likely motivated by self-interest, touched on her own lingering concerns. Alexander lived in a world of wealth, power, and global influence. Could someone like her truly fit into that life? Or was she setting herself up for another heartbreak? The rest of her day passed in a blur of teaching and administrative tasks. Her students seemed to sense her distraction, though none commented directly. By the time she returned to her apartment that evening, Emma felt emotionally drained from the mixture of excitement and anxiety swirling through her. She prepared a simple dinner and settled on her sofa with Alexander's gift, running her fingers over the fine leather binding of the book. As she read through the poems, she found herself lingering on the passage he had marked, wondering what he had truly seen in her to inspire such a thoughtful connection. Her phone chimed with a text from Alexander. "I hope your day went well. Looking forward to tomorrow evening." The simple message brought a smile to her face. She replied, "It was busy but good. Looking forward to seeing you too." Emma slept poorly that night, her dreams a confused mixture of dance studios, family dinner parties, and Alexander watching from shadowy corners. She woke feeling unrested, a sense of unease lingering as she prepared for the day ahead. Friday brought more teaching and a staff meeting at the Arts Center where Diane continued to cast knowing glances her way. Emma had shared nothing about Alexander's gift or their plans for the evening, but her friend's intuition was uncanny. "Hot date tonight?" Diane asked as they gathered their materials after the meeting. "A private rehearsal for a dance company," Emma replied, seeing no point in denying it. Diane's eyebrows rose. "Dance? Is that okay for you?" The question was gentle, acknowledging Emma's complex relationship with the art form that had once defined her future. "I think so," Emma said after a moment. "It might be difficult, but also beautiful." "He seems to understand you," Diane observed. "That's rare, especially this early." "We're still getting to know each other," Emma cautioned, though she couldn't deny the accuracy of Diane's observation. The hours until 6 o'clock seemed to crawl by. Emma finished her last lesson, tidied her teaching space, and headed home with enough time to shower and change. She chose her outfit carefully, a deep burgundy dress with three-quarter sleeves that was elegant without being overly formal, paired with comfortable but stylish flats. Alexander arrived precisely at 6, his text announcing his presence downstairs, giving Emma a moment to take a deep breath before grabbing her cane and heading down. He was waiting beside his car, looking as impeccable as always in a charcoal suit that fit his athletic frame perfectly. When he spotted her, his expression warmed in a way that made Emma's heart skip. "You look beautiful," he said simply as she approached. "Thank you," Emma replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "You're not so bad yourself." Alexander smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face, and opened the car door for her. "I thought we might have a light dinner at the theater's private dining room before the rehearsal," he explained as they drove. "The company's artistic director will join us briefly. She's eager to meet you." "Oh?" Emma was surprised. "Why would she be interested in meeting me?" Alexander glanced at her. "I might have mentioned that you were a dancer. Rebecca is always interested in connecting with others who understand the art form." Emma tensed slightly. "I was a dancer," Past tense. Once a dancer, always a dancer, Alexander replied quietly. Even if you no longer perform professionally, you carry that knowledge and perspective with you. Rebecca values that. His understanding of this fundamental truth about her identity, that dance remained part of her, even if transformed, touched Emma deeply. "Thank you for that," she said softly. The theater was a modern building in the heart of the arts district. Alexander guided Emma through a private entrance to a small, elegantly appointed dining room where a table was set for 3. Large windows overlooked the city as twilight descended, bathing the room in a soft, golden glow. They had just been served glasses of wine when a striking woman in her 50s entered. Tall and slender, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a sleek bun, she moved with the unmistakable grace of a former dancer. "Alexander, right on time as always," she greeted warmly before turning to Emma with keen interest. "And you must be Emma. I'm Rebecca Chen." Emma recognized the name immediately. Rebecca Chen had been a principal dancer with the National Ballet before becoming one of the most innovative choreographers and directors of her generation. "It's an honor to meet you," Emma said genuinely as they shook hands. "I studied your interpretation of Firebird during my training. It was revolutionary." Rebecca's face lit up. "A knowledgeable viewer. Alexander mentioned you trained seriously before your accident." Emma appreciated that Rebecca acknowledged her accident directly rather than dancing around it with awkward euphemisms. "I was at the National Academy on scholarship when it happened." "The Academy only takes exceptional talent," Rebecca noted, her professional assessment matter of fact. "Your technique must have been superb." "Emma plays piano beautifully as well," Alexander added. "She teaches at the Westside Community Arts Center now." The conversation flowed easily as they enjoyed a light meal of elegant small plates. Rebecca asked thoughtful questions about Emma's training and her current work with music students, showing genuine interest without dwelling uncomfortably on what might have been. "Alexander tells me you've recently begun to move again," Rebecca said as their meal was concluding, her tone casual but her eyes sharp with professional curiosity. Emma shot Alexander a questioning glance. He looked slightly uncomfortable, the first time she had seen him so. "I mentioned that you had danced a little in my studio," he explained. "I hope that wasn't overstepping." "Not at all," Emma assured him, though she was surprised he had shared that private moment. Turning back to Rebecca, she added, "It was very informal, just some simple movement to remember how it feels." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "Movement memory is powerful. The body remembers even when circumstances change." She hesitated, then continued with careful precision. "I'm developing a new piece about transformation and resilience. I'd be interested in your perspective if you'd ever consider consulting." Emma blinked in surprise. "Consulting? I'm not sure what I could offer." "Authentic insight," Rebecca replied simply. "Too many works about disability are created by those who've never experienced it. I'm interested in something more genuine." She smiled, rising from her seat. "Think about it. No pressure. For now, I should check on my dancers before the rehearsal. Alexander knows where to find your seats." After Rebecca departed, Emma turned to Alexander. "Did you arrange that? The consulting offer?" "Absolutely not," he replied firmly. "Rebecca is fiercely independent about her artistic choices. I wouldn't presume to influence them." He hesitated. "I did tell her about you, but any interest she has in your perspective is entirely her own." Emma studied his face, finding only sincerity there. "I believe you. I'm just surprised." "You shouldn't be," Alexander said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Others see your value, Emma, even if you sometimes struggle to recognize it yourself." The simple observation struck close to home. Since her accident, Emma had defined herself primarily by what she had lost: her career, her fiancé, her physical capabilities. Alexander from the beginning had seen her differently, defined not by absence, but by presence. As they made their way to the theater's private box, Emma found herself watching Alexander with new eyes. He moved with the same confident precision as always, but she was beginning to see the man beneath the polished exterior, the orphaned boy who had learned to control his world, the executive who valued excellence, and now, the man who saw beyond her disability to the person she truly was. The theater was empty except for a few company administrators and technical staff scattered around the orchestra section. Alexander guided Emma to center seats in a small private box with an excellent view of the stage. Rebecca's new work is called Fracture, he explained as they settled in. It explores how breaking can lead to new forms of beauty and strength. Emma nodded, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. The theme hit uncomfortably close to her own experience, the breaking of her body and dreams, and the slow, painful process of building something new from the pieces. As the lights dimmed and the dancers took their positions on stage, Emma felt Alexander's hand close gently over hers, offering silent support. She glanced at him, finding his eyes on her rather than the stage, watchful and concerned. "I'm okay," she whispered, turning back to the stage. The music began, haunting strings underlaid with percussive elements that created tension and anticipation. The dancers moved with precision and emotion, their bodies telling a story of disruption and renewal. Emma found herself leaning forward, completely absorbed in the performance unfolding before her. One dancer in particular caught her attention, a woman whose movement quality suggested she had overcome injury or significant physical challenge. Her dancing incorporated asymmetry and limitation as strengths rather than weaknesses, creating moments of startling beauty unlike anything Emma had seen in traditional ballet. "The soloist in blue," Emma whispered. "She's dancing with some kind of physical constraint." Alexander nodded. "Lucia. She had a spinal fusion 3 years ago. Rebecca created this role specifically for her capabilities." Emma watched transfixed as Lucia moved across the stage, her dancing simultaneously acknowledging limitation and transcending it. There was no attempt to hide her physical constraints. Instead, they became integral to a new vocabulary of movement that was uniquely powerful. "She's extraordinary," Emma whispered. "Rebecca believes in creating art that embraces reality rather than escaping it," Alexander replied softly. "It's why I've supported her company for years. She sees beauty where others see only imperfection." The rehearsal continued, each movement of the dancers telling a story of breaking and rebuilding that resonated deeply with Emma. By the time the final sequence began, a triumphant ensemble piece that incorporated all the fractured elements into a new harmonious whole, tears were sliding silently down her cheeks. Alexander noticed immediately, his hand tightening around hers. "Was this too difficult?" he asked, his voice low with concern. "We can leave." Emma shook her head. "No, it's not that. It's—" She struggled to articulate the complex emotions surging through her. "It's seeing something I've felt expressed so perfectly. The breaking and the after. The way nothing is ever the same, but there's still beauty to be found." Alexander's expression softened with understanding. When the final notes faded and the dancers held their positions in the closing tableau, he brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. As the work lights came up and the dancers began to confer with Rebecca on the stage below, Alexander led Emma down to meet them. Lucia, still flushed from her exertion, broke into a wide smile when Rebecca introduced Emma as a former dancer. "Your performance was beautiful," Emma told her sincerely. "The way you've developed a new movement vocabulary that honors your physical reality. It's inspiring." Lucia's eyes lit up with recognition of a kindred spirit. "It wasn't easy," she admitted. "After my surgery, I thought I'd never dance again. Rebecca convinced me that different didn't mean lesser." "She's right," Emma said, feeling the truth of it in her bones. The conversation continued, turning technical as Emma asked about specific sequences and adaptations. For the first time in years, she found herself deeply engaged in discussing dance without the shadow of loss darkening the experience. These dancers, particularly Lucia, didn't see her as a tragic figure or a formerly gifted performer. They saw her as a knowledgeable colleague with valuable insights. Alexander stood slightly apart, watching the animated exchange with quiet satisfaction. When Emma finally turned to him, her eyes were bright with an excitement he hadn't seen before. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said as they left the theater later that evening. "It was transformative." "I'm glad," Alexander replied, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Rebecca is a visionary. I thought you might connect with her approach." "The consulting opportunity she mentioned?" Emma began hesitantly. "Do you think she was serious?" "Rebecca doesn't make offers she doesn't mean," Alexander assured her. "If you're interested, she would welcome your input." "I am interested," Emma admitted. "Very much so." They stopped beside Alexander's car, the night air cool around them. Instead of opening the door immediately, Alexander turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked, reaching up to touch his face gently. "That I'm watching you reclaim parts of yourself," he replied, catching her hand and kissing her palm. "It's beautiful to witness." The simple honesty of his words touched her deeply. "It's easier with you," she confessed. "You see me as I am now, not as who I was supposed to be." Alexander drew her closer, his arms encircling her with careful strength. "I see exactly who you are, Emma Wilson, and I'm falling in love with her." The declaration hung in the air between them, unexpected, yet somehow inevitable. Emma's heart raced as she searched his face and found nothing but sincerity in his steady gaze. "Alexander," she began, uncertain how to respond to such directness. "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "I simply wanted you to know where I stand. I've never been one for games or uncertainty." Emma smiled, touching his cheek again. "That directness of yours is both terrifying and wonderful." She took a deep breath. "I'm falling for you too, and it scares me because our worlds are still so different." "They don't have to be separate worlds," Alexander said quietly. "They could become our world together." The possibility hung between them, tantalizing, frightening, full of unknown challenges and potential joys. Emma stood on tiptoe and kissed him, pouring her complicated emotions into the connection between them. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect late spring day. Emma prepared for her mother's dinner party with unusual care, selecting a forest green dress that complemented her eyes and styling her hair in soft waves around her face. The invitation had mentioned casual elegance, which in Catherine Wilson's lexicon meant anything but casual. Alexander had offered to accompany her when she mentioned the event during their drive home from the theater, but Emma had gently declined. She needed to establish boundaries with her family on her own terms before introducing him to that complicated dynamic. "Are you sure?" he had asked, his concern evident. "Your mother's obvious agenda might be easier to navigate with an ally." "I'm sure," Emma had replied. "This is something I need to handle myself. Besides, you have that conference call with Singapore tonight." Alexander had looked impressed that she remembered his schedule. "Tomorrow, then? Brunch, perhaps?" They had agreed to meet the following day, parting with a kiss that lingered with Emma even now as she prepared to face her family alone. The drive to her parents' suburban home brought a familiar mixture of love and frustration. The Wilson family home was impressive without being ostentatious, a colonial-style house in an established neighborhood where her parents had lived for nearly 30 years. Emma had grown up in this house, practiced her first dance steps in the finished basement, and later returned to recover after her accident. Several cars were already parked in the circular driveway when Emma arrived. She recognized her father's business partner's luxury sedan and the sleek sports car belonging to her cousin Diana's husband. Taking a deep breath, she gathered her small clutch and cane before making her way to the front door. "Emma, darling, there you are." Catherine greeted her with air kisses that didn't quite connect. "Everyone's in the living room. Come in." The small dinner party turned out to include 12 guests, mostly her father's business associates and their wives, along with Diana and her husband. Emma noticed Diana's eyebrows raise slightly at her entrance, no doubt expecting Alexander to follow behind her. "Emma, you remember the Prestons," Catherine said, guiding her through the obligatory greetings. "And of course, the Hendersons. Their son Mark has just returned from London. He's taking over the family investment firm." The introduction was delivered with pointed emphasis, making its purpose clear. Mark Henderson was tall and conventionally handsome, with the confident smile of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. He shook Emma's hand a beat too long, his eyes lingering on her face. "A pleasure to meet you, Emma," he said smoothly. "Your mother mentioned you teach music. That must be rewarding." "It is," Emma replied, keeping her tone pleasant but neutral. She had recognized Catherine's matchmaking attempt immediately and had no intention of encouraging it, especially since Mark had pointedly avoided acknowledging her cane. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, with Emma seated between Mark and her father's accountant, a quiet man in his 60s. Diana was positioned directly across from her, her expression revealing curious disappointment at Alexander's absence. "So, Emma," Diana said during the second course, her voice carrying clearly across the table, "we heard you've been spending time with Alexander Blackwood. I'm surprised he's not here tonight." A hush fell over the nearby conversations as heads turned toward Emma. "Alexander had prior commitments," Emma replied evenly. "A business call with Singapore." "How fascinating," Diana pressed, her smile sharp. "And how exactly did you manage to catch the attention of someone like Alexander Blackwood? Everyone knows he never dates." The implication was clear. What could Alexander possibly see in her? Before Emma could respond, Mark interjected, "Blackwood? The tech CEO? Bit of a cold fish from what I've heard. All business, no personality." Emma felt a flash of protective anger. "You've heard wrong," she said, her voice cooler than before. "Alexander is deeply thoughtful and surprisingly warm once you know him." "Well, you'd know better than most, apparently," Diana commented with false sweetness. "Though one has to wonder how long someone like him remains interested in unconventional relationships." The deliberate pause and pointed glance at Emma's cane made her meaning unmistakable. The table fell uncomfortably silent, even Catherine looking discomfited by the directness of Diana's attack. 6 months ago, Emma might have flushed with embarrassment, changed the subject, or excused herself. Tonight, something different rose within her, a calm certainty that had been building since the moment Alexander had first defied expectations to stand beside her at Lily's wedding. "What an interesting perspective, Diana," Emma said, her voice clear and steady. "I've found that truly exceptional people value substance over superficial considerations. Alexander appreciates authenticity and resilience, qualities that come from overcoming challenges rather than avoiding them." She turned to address the table more broadly. "My relationship with Alexander is private, but I will say this. He sees people for who they truly are, not for what they can do for him or how they appear. It's a rare quality, and one I've come to value deeply." The stunned silence that followed was broken by Emma's father clearing his throat. "Well said, Emma." For the first time in years, she saw genuine pride in his eyes. The conversation gradually resumed, shifting to safer topics, but Emma noticed a subtle change in how the other guests regarded her, with newfound respect rather than polite pity. Diana remained notably quiet for the remainder of the meal. Later, as dessert was being served, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Call concluded. How is the dinner party? Missing you." A warm smile spread across her face as she typed back, "Standing my ground, missing you too." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen